Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome back. It's the Rant Network. And folks, we may have turned the page on 2024 to 2025, and we might have say, hey, it's a new year. Let's talk about something new in perspective. Unfortunately, we really have to go back on some of the older topics that really were prominent in 2024 because they're just not going away in 2025. And that includes the UN and the Pope. Welcome back, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm David Solomon. Stuart Brisgell is still away. We are the Rant Network, where we bring you unedited, unfiltered, uncensored conversations on a wide range of topics. This podcast is dedicated to giving you a platform to express your opinions, sharing your thoughts, your experiences, your ideas, and hear from a variety of different perspectives. Folks, we dive into the latest news, culture, and so much more. So please sit back and take in the first edition of the Rant Network for 2025. Now, while we were away and we were doing the top 10 of the year, unfortunately, Israel once again popped into the spotlight. At Christmas time, you would think that what you would talk positively about is celebrating Christmas in Nazareth, the beauty of the Christmas and New Year's. Even though I don't celebrate Christmas, there's a beauty to it behind it. There should be a beauty behind it. And there should be, a time of peace and love, but it doesn't happen. But what does consistently happen, unfortunately, is the ongoing anti-Semitism by prominent individuals. And it's so clear and it's so evident. So let's start with my first one, and that is Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Antonio Guterres has never hidden his dislike for Israel, his hate. He'd love to see Israel destroyed. And while he says, no, that's not true, his statements are clearly so anti-Israel, it's actually vile. 12 days ago, he blamed Israel for attacking Syria. He claims we have to stop. Didn't matter that there's been attacks from Syria, from Iran, from Syria. It didn't matter that, that there were threats of attacks on Israel. Didn't matter to Antonio Guterres. The only thing that mattered is that Israel was doing something. It's not his first time, folks. He did that after October the 7th. Yeah, the UN sort of said this was bad. But since October 7th, 2023, Antonio Guterres has taken one attack after another on the state of Israel for defending herself against Hamas. October the 7th is not the first time rockets were launched, but thousands and thousands of rockets were launched into Israel. We talked about this. 1,200 people were murdered, raped. And yet the United Nations continues to deny Israel her right to defend herself. Not only in Gaza, but even in the United Nations. The UN has denied that these people were raped, murdered, burnt, tortured. It denied UNICEF to go in and find the children who were kidnapped. The Red Cross is not going in to look for the hostages. Zero, nothing. That's okay. But Israel's blamed, and Guterres has continued to blame Israel for the lack of aid going in there and all these hypocritical things, and even to accuse Israel of genocide. Talk about that in a minute. But that's the United Nations. Now imagine, if you will, as soon as Israel retaliated against Hezbollah, way after October the 8th, when Hezbollah was firing rockets at Israel and built tunnels and did all these things, Guterres blamed Israel and condemned Israel for retaliating. This is now even worse, because the Houthis have been firing rockets into Israel as well. And Israel's had enough and finally retaliated by destroying many of its infrastructure. And what does Guterres do? Condemns Israel's strikes against Yemen, against the Houthis. He hasn't said one word against the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, Iraq, you name it. Only Israel. And as the head of the UN, this is the message he's driving. Israel's to be blamed for everything. Centuries-old hate. Centuries-old anti-Semitism. Bravo, UN Secretary General. Your true colors have come out. This is more proof the UN is useless. Now, my hope is under the new administration with Donald Trump and Elise Stefanik as the new ambassador, she'll go in, very much like what Nikki Haley did, and rattle the cage. And hopefully, Donald Trump sends such a clear message to the UN that this is no longer acceptable, intolerable, and Guterres should step down. It's not going to happen because in that jungle where the inmates run the asylum, where Iran, or Qatar, or Russia, and China literally run the show, the US can only do so much. So let's hope that something does change. And Guterres steps down and a new leadership comes in because we're sick and tired of this ongoing racism and anti-Semitism. Israel has a right to defend herself, and unfortunately, the UN doesn't believe so. But Guterres is not the only one. Shout out to Erin Mullen, who is the former Sky News reporter from Australia. If you don't know who she is, please look her up. Because she stood with Israel time and time again, and her posts went viral around the world, she was fired for defending the state of Israel, which she believed was standing on the right side of history, and she was right. But unfortunately, her bosses didn't believe so. Australia, the politicians, and many others have gone down the road of hate and anti-Semitism and anti-Israel and pro-terrorism. They love it. And Erin made a comment which I had thought about, and she went out and did a great job. And please watch her video. It's all of 9 minutes. Why is the Pope condemning Israel? It's fascinating because if you think about the papacy over centuries, they've been anti-Jewish forever. Jews were the scapegoat, whether it was the Black Plague, other issues. Jews were used as scapegoats to ensure that the church would always be in power, the church would always be right. And the church employed these tactics for centuries. We know this, we've seen this throughout, time, that the church just stayed quiet when Jews were in peril. And when Jews were not in peril, but they could have been threatened, they used the Jews as the scapegoats. In World War II, the papacy, Vatican, stayed very much out of the opportunity to help Jews to escape Nazis, to escape the hate that the Nazis put forward, to try to avoid the Holocaust. But no, instead, what these, unfortunately, the Pope led the Jews to slaughter. There was that much anti-Semitism and hate in the Vatican. Pope John Paul II changed that, where he actually said there should be a rapprochement between Jews and Catholics, that there should be that. And he did make moves and efforts to ensure that the Catholics and Jews would finally get over those centuries-old, misconceptions. I mean, all the stereotypes you hear today came from the church. And it's still going on today. You would think that the Pope would have half a brain and understand that Jews and Catholics have much in common. But instead, this Pope doesn't believe so. This Pope Francis actually believes the Nazi rhetoric that he grew up hearing in Argentina, that Jews are the bad ones. Now, he could say whatever he wants, but actions speak louder than words. When he went to Israel and visited Israel a number of years ago, and he went on his so-called pilgrimage, he blamed Israel for the problem with the Palestinians. He went to the wall that divided the West Bank and Israel and prayed at it as if it was the Western Wall, and that was his attitude. His attitude towards Israel has never wavered. It's been anti-Semitism to the core. Instead of the Pope standing up with Jews and saying, we need to fight radical Islam, he went on and became the useful idiot that the Iranians love and Hamas loves by saying that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. What proof do you have? Generals, governments, even the UN in their own kind of kooky kind of way said, oh yeah, no, there's no genocide here. The definition of genocide doesn't exist here. There is no genocide. Where there is genocide has been the death and the murder and the rape and the pillage of Christians in the Middle East and in Africa. And he's quiet. He hasn't said a word against it publicly. Instead, he vilifies Israel. That children shouldn't die. Yes, I agree, children shouldn't die. But what about the scores of children that were killed on October the 7th? What about the women who were raped on October the 7th? Not important. Because to the Pope, the only thing that matters is blame the Jews. He and Antonio Guterres are the useful idiots at both Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. They love them because they're continuing this fight. Ladies and gentlemen, radical Islam exists. It is vile. I'm not saying every Muslim. I'm not saying every Arab. But like there are radicals in any group, there are radical Muslims here who fundamentally want to see Israel destroyed, Jews killed. Europe has fought these radical Muslims for centuries. And now they've put their arms down and said, come into our homes, come into our countries. They're in America, they're in Europe, they're all over the place. And the Pope, Antonio Guterres, instead of focusing on stopping the growth of this radicalism, has encouraged it by slamming Israel, by promoting anti-Semitism. That's right, promoting it, not denying it, not cutting it off, not stopping it, promoting it. These two individuals of power are embarrassing. And the same way Guterres should be taken down in the UN, I wish that there were cardinals. I wish that there were people within the church who had the intestinal fortitude to take Pope Francis and said, maybe it's time for you to retire. Step aside. We need new leadership because this kind of leadership leads us to the slaughter. Pope Francis is 88 years old. He's not going to be there much longer. I kind of get that. But by him making a message that he does during Christmas to blame Israel, and it's odd because if you went to Nazareth right now during Christmas time, what would you see? You think you'd see Christians and the pilgrimage in Nazareth? What you saw was violence. The radical Muslims violently attacked Christian worshipers. The Pope stayed silent. Meanwhile, you go across Israel to Haifa, and you see Jews and Christians together with Muslims celebrating Christmas and Hanukkah, which fell on the same time. That he didn't talk about. That he didn't praise. That the only place in the entire Middle East and Africa where Christians can pray and be themselves is Israel. Instead, he'd rather give a high five to the terrorists than to help his own people. That's why both Guterres and Pope Francis need to go away, need to retire, need to move on. They are detrimental to our society, not just to Jews in the world, but to all of us. Pope Francis is sending us to the slaughter by making statements like that. Guterres is putting us to the slaughter by making statements against Jews. They're empowering and emboldening these radical Muslims to continue this fight, this intifada in the streets, this what they call resistance, because their resistance isn't just to Jews and to Israel, but to all non-Muslims. And they've recruited people around the world, non-Muslims alike, to fight this fight. And Guterres and Pope Francis have just said, you're right. And the rest of us with real values are wrong. We don't need you two to send us to the slaughter. We don't need that at all. What we needed was you to stand up and stop being afraid. What label? You're going to be called an Islamophobe? Like that label really is going to make a difference at this point? Words matter. So stand up and help. Don't send us to the slaughter. You have the power to do it. Use it or step aside and let others do it right. That's it for today, folks. Thank you for joining us on the inaugural episode of 2025. We hope that you enjoyed this conversation and get something out of it. We appreciate your support. We'll be back again Friday at noon Eastern, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, noon Eastern. That's when we broadcast. We want your comments, please, on YouTube. We're back on Rumble. Yay, we're back on Rumble. And folks, we need you to please share us, like us on all the social channels. And until Friday, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a healthy and happy, peaceful, successful new year. And let's hope 2025 is better